Welcome everyone! Veselin Topalov has pretty much retired by now, but it's always a pleasure to review his games. He always played for the win with white or black, he liked complications and sharp attacks, but even with that uncompromising playing style, he still passed over 2800 and became the world champion. So let's finally check out one of his games. This one is from the Sinquefield Cup 2015 and he played a very sharp novelty in the opening, as you'll see. He faced Magnus Carlsen. Carlsen had white and opened with e4, c5, the Sicilian. As I said, Topalov's always up for a real fight. However, after knight to f3 and d6, Carlsen didn't go for an open Sicilian with d4, but instead bishop b5 check. Probably he wasn't in the mood for an open Sicilian with tons of theory. It continued knight d7, which is more ambitious than blocking with the bishop, because now there's no peace trades. Then castles, knight f6 and rook to e1, defending the e-pawn. But now a6. Sometimes white gets to play c3 and d4, and if allowed, white would go bishop to a4 and then bring the bishop back to c2. But by going a6, white cannot do that anymore, because the bishop would be trapped by the pawns. White could simply bring the bishop all the way back, and after b6, white often opens up the position anyway with d4, and after the trade, black would fianchetto the bishop and put pressure on e4. Carlsen didn't go for that, he went bishop to d3, which is actually more common, and maybe white will still get to play c3 and bishop c2, but not in this game. b5 was next, threatening to kick the bishop again with c4, so white goes c4 himself, but it's at this point that Topalov played a new move at the time. He went for the very aggressive g5. And that suits Topalov's style really well. If allowed, black will advance again with g4, which gives black control over e5, but if white takes the pawn, then at some point the rook will go to g8 opposite the white king. White really shouldn't allow g4 if white would play pawn takes b5. Then after g4 it can get quite complicated after e5, pawn takes and knight to g5. And here Topalov had planned to go knight to b6, which hits the loose bishop, but he also had preparation with rook to g8 and eventually even f5 in a similar position. That would have been fun to see. But Carlsen didn't allow that. After a very long think, he indeed did take the pawn, but this variation also gets sharp, and as we know, Carlsen is most comfortable in more boring, simplified positions with fixed pawn structures. He's not as good when it's messy and sharp. So let's see how he did. Knight e5, black just gained that square, bishop e2, and Topalov took on c4, hoping he'll one day get to plant that knight on d3. Knight a3 prepares to take the c-pawn however, but rook g8 attacks the loose knight, so there's no time to take the c-pawn. But now something really strange happened. Carlsen took on c4 anyway. So he wins a second pawn, but he's losing a piece either way. If after knight takes c4, white takes back, then the knight drops. And if white doesn't take back, then of course he remains a piece down. Carlsen did have something in mind, of course. He also thought 20 minutes before playing knight takes c4, so it's not like he missed something in time pressure, but even after that long think, it turns out his plan was just bad. If we briefly go back, he could have simply played d4, defending his knight and attacking black's knight, and after pawn takes and bishop takes, white could either drop his knight back and trade off black's best piece, or even go f2, f4 and drive away the knight. White seems to be completely fine here. Instead, Carlsen decided to just sack a piece, but it doesn't even end here. After knight takes, Carlsen first continued with d4, defending his knight and trying to force black into a defensive position. And after Topalov saved his knight, Carlsen had planned this attack with bishop to h5, attacking f7. And it kinda seems like Carlsen is trying to play Topalov's kind of game. Topalov likes attacking and playing double-edged positions, but that's just not Carlsen's forte. Let's see what happens. Topalov wisely takes that bishop off. Now, I would be tempted to just get rid of that dangerous knight. Remember, white sacked a piece earlier, so we remain material up. But then we can also take on d4. That at least seems like a safe way to play. But we are talking about Topalov here. He didn't get to be world champion by playing it safe. Instead he went rook g7, just covering the weak pawns. But after knight takes, Topalov maybe got a bit carried away. He played queen d7. Again, black could give some material back. And again take on d4. Maybe it's a bit unclear, white could also target a bishop on f8 or run with the h-pawn, but still it seems black is playing for two results. However, queen d7 was Topalov's choice, then a trade on c5, and here Carlsen again misjudged the position. What white should play is knight takes bishop. Now I can understand why he wouldn't be attracted to that move since he's trying to attack, but he didn't really have a choice. Black doesn't take back, that would quickly end in checkmate. Black would play queen to h3, exploiting the pin. White now has to trade, otherwise it's mate. And maybe black is still a bit better, black can trap the knight with rook g8 and f6, but there's probably decent drawing chances for white. Instead, Carlsen thought he still had a strong attack somehow and went e5, but in fact that's just a blunder. Queen c6 just snuffs out any hope for white, because after white stops the checkmate threat, then queen g6 forces a queen trade because mate is again threatened. Carlsen tried this knight check, remember there's a rook on e1, but Topalov wasn't born yesterday. After king d8, Carlsen did trade queens, and white now has two pawns for the piece, but as we'll see, that's just not enough to save the game. Topalov activated his remaining pieces. Carlsen now didn't take on c5 because that would allow bishop takes f3. So he went h4 instead. Topalov now defended the c-pawn anyway. h5. Carlsen's trying to make something of his passed pawn, but it didn't get further than this. Bishop d2. Knight to c4, attacking the bishop and the pawn. Then black's second bishop joined in. A check. And king to e8, the king is still safe. White would also like to improve his king, but king to f2 would make things worse. Black would now go bishop e3 check, very nice move. And the point is that after rook takes, white doesn't win two pieces for a rook because of the flashy rook g2 check. And at the end of this, black's just a rook up. So rook to d3 instead. The rest really isn't interesting anymore. Topalov's winning quite simply. Bishop f4 attacking e5. Knight f2 defends. Bishop c6. Knight h3. Bishop to g3. This actually works out for black. After rook to e2, bishop b5 is eyeing up both these rooks. So rook to d1. But then bishop to c6. This sets up a nice trap. After knight f2, Topalov just snaps that pawn off, and white cannot recapture because bishop takes f3 skewers the rooks and rook takes g2 is threatened. So knight to g4, but now black just traded, also giving white another weak pawn. Also by now white only has one pawn for the piece. King f2, rook h8 targeting another one. Knight e5, another trade. Bishop e8 defends the c-pawn. Both players were quite short on time. This must have been the only reason why Carlsen was still playing on. It didn't go on very long though. g4, f6, rook to e6, but after bishop to b5 and rook to c7 guarding the e-pawn, they've reached the time control and Carlsen resigned. Very exciting game, but also a strange game. After being hit with that opening surprise, Carlsen took a very long time to come up with a plan, but even then the plan just wasn't good, and he also tries to play attacking chess when that's just not one of his strengths. Let's briefly check some key positions. So it started off with this really interesting novelty by Topalov, which opened up the g-file and won him the e5 square. Then there was this strange decision by Carlsen to just sack a piece for two pawns. And then he tried this attack on the king side, but not only is it really not dangerous, he then also blundered with e5, allowing Topalov to trade queens. Carlsen was just a piece down for almost no compensation, and even against the world champion, that was an easy win for Topalov. Anyway, it's always fun to check out Topalov's games. He's always been a very exciting player. Let me know if you want to see more of his games as well. If you enjoyed, please do me a favor and like the video. There'll be another great game tomorrow, so I'll be seeing you guys again soon, and take care.